Now to the next burning question of the day. Does Australia need a citizens' militia? Well, his name's Anthony Bergen, and he writes in the Sydney Morning Herald today, yes, we do. He says to strengthen national security, we should no longer shy away from looking at options short of conscription models. This shouldn't be hard to sell to the Australian people. The time is right. Now, Bergen's context is very important here. He points out that in the past, strategic planners have said any direct attack on our home would be given up to 10 years notice, basically. They'd be able to see it in the waters and suss out when we could have to need to be ready for some kind of military movement like that. Well, the latest Defence Strategic Review has judged that basically now the warning time is essentially zero. Also, this is on the back of a very recent let's say, parliamentary committee hearing where the ADF admitted they're not being able to recruit at the rate that they want to. They're struggling to even retain their current staffing levels, and they estimate that this year only 73% of their recruitment goal will be reached. The federal government has a goal of recruiting 8,500 new recruits by 2040, and the likelihood of us reaching that is looking dismal indeed. So Bergen argues, for the sake of national defence, why don't we embrace what the review itself suggests, and that is this idea of a national defence system whereby everyday Aussies who are willing and able will be given very minor military training, but better than nothing, and just a little bit of military knowledge. So should we ever find ourselves, say, in a situation like Ukraine, everyday citizens will know a little bit about what to do next. So basically, were someone to do a direct hit with very little notice, I guess it would look something like this.
Sphere on 1. This is the moment we were training for all yesterday afternoon.
And now for the battle plan. As you all know, the key to victory is the element of surprise. Surprise!
Still better than nothing, right? I mean, I actually like this idea, the way Bergen poses it. It's not some mandatory conscription model, in which case I'd be like, no, do not give the government more power. But this is simply giving everyday Aussies just like, hey, if worst comes to worst, here's a few things that you might find handy in that case. I rather like it.
What, they're going to teach you how to shoot a gun that you're not allowed to own?
Well, I already know how to shoot a gun.
And who would be drawn to this kind of model anyway? Would it be people who just want to learn how to shoot a firearm? And we've got to question their motives here. I'm not sure I trust the general
military
population.
training.
But were we to find ourselves in a situation like Ukraine, where we know that a lot of civilians have taken up arms, if anything, they're the main battlefront here, defending their homes, wouldn't it be useful to have people who aren't as useless as the current population currently would be in such a situation being like, yeah, I know a thing or two. Right now, all those people would be out in the rural areas and everyone in the cities would be like, OK, we're screwed.
But the reason the Australian government are not training citizens is because they're relying on the Americans to come to our aid, so we're not going to need, you know, mums and dads.
Yeah, that's handy. They're not as close to China as we are.
That's their plan. But, I mean, if we are in danger of attack and war could be, you know, launched at any moment, then rather than a citizens' militia, what about like an Australian Defence Force? We know we don't have enough ships, we don't have enough planes, we don't have enough military men, we don't have a manufacturing industry. If the government was serious about this, they wouldn't be training mums and dads to fight. They'd be setting up the nation to have an actual defence force.
That argument actually just strengthens his.
How?
Yes, the ADF. They've said we can't recruit enough people. We're barely keeping the numbers that we have. Therefore, in their own review, they say we need to look at options like this.
If
the
that's
fact
the case,
that you're saying, oh, they don't have enough weaponry, they don't have enough this, they don't have enough that, that is an argument in defence of Anthony Bergen's argument.
I'm sorry, but with a population of something like 1 billion in China, I don't think we stand much of a chance, even if all of us get armed, we're going down.
You two,
it's
so
great.
defeatist.
I think, and also, I mean, look, I mentioned Singapore again. It's a country with national conscription. You can also look at Israel, which conscripts both men and women. They're very different places where, by the nature of their size and the hostile neighbours, in the case of Israel, people feel really compelled to serve their country and take up arms and learn how to defend the country. I don't think we've got that sentiment here in Australia. Either we're complacent about the real threat that China faces, or fundamentally, we're just too laid back. We'd rather just have a bubble.
Well, the other problem we've got in Australia is if you want to promote loyalty to country, it's hard to do that when at the same time you're teaching your kids that we're founded on genocide. If you want to promote national unity, you can't do that while politicians are continually dividing us into identity groups. And how do you promote a willingness to serve when we don't seem to have agreed values anymore beyond, you know,
that would help
do what
with
you want?
this too.
Yeah, look,
this would create an uprising of patriotism. We do have some growingly hostile neighbours to think about. And the fact that, you know, you rightly say Israel is smaller and in a very different situation. Singapore is tiny, and yet those guys are putting us to shame as a nation of almost 26 million people with a ginormous island. Geographically, we're blessed should this scenario ever come to pass. I just think it's a great idea to have more modern-day citizens, everyday citizens, that know a thing or two about what to do.
Look, I think James is right. It remains to be seen who are we fighting for anyway. Maybe we should wait for the treaty to come if we're going to fight for Australia or some other completely different Aboriginal nation.